Greetings, YouTube, and now for the inevitable and obligatory atheist and feminist episode. Let's start with the easy topic. I did not grow up in some deeply religious background. I was not traumatized by a priest touching me in any kind of inappropriate manner. Don't have any horror stories about really tight Sunday school shoes. Our grandmother was the only church person in our family, so when she passed away, we all basically stopped going. Now, throughout my childhood, for the most part, I always thought it was just a little weird and suspicious that omnipotent being that had enough power to create a universe and destroy it would have fuckboy characteristics. This thing where he was constantly testing human beings for their faith, whether or not they were going to be loyal to him in some way. You know that. The story of Abraham. I mean, they go on and on, those types of stories. And it doesn't sound like something that a creature that's that strong and powerful would do, does it? It just sounds like the typical father who has a bit of a narcissistic personality. Only narcissistic people I know are human beings. Anyway, moving on. By the time I turned into a teenager, I fully embraced atheism. And as typical baby atheists do, they talk the loudest, usually out of fear of being proselytized back into some kind of religion. I realized just how self-destructive that attitude or that tendency was. So by the time I got into my early 20s and became an activist, I realized being more secure in my own atheism, being around people who were ministers, rabbis, reverends, but who were doing political work was important, to not let their beliefs alienate me from community organizing any more than my beliefs should be alienating theirs. And I never ever had a problem or an issue or a debate with anyone within the activist circles. Now, by the time I hit my mid to late 20s, I did have a bit of a regression. I wouldn't call it, it wasn't anything like I was ready to join the Christians or anything like that. I think what it was that around that time period I was expanding my own knowledge about West African culture and beliefs, reading about the ancestors of African Americans, talking about the Yoruba, the Igbo, the groups that were basically sold into slavery to the Europeans by either the Islamic tribes or the more advanced tribes who kind of sold out to the invaders. Maybe some of this stuff makes sense to me, but again, the whole deity worship, because there's about pantheon of the Ifa gods are pretty long group, just almost no different from the Norse gods in a way, or the Greek gods. But either way, I knew deep down it wasn't for me. I think what I liked was the whole cultural aspect of that religion and the fact that it really was. It's like the Druid pagans. It's a very holistic religion. There's a lot of reliance on holistic medicine, diet that I thought were really interesting. But the spiritual part of it is just not for me. Now, the question of spirituality, because people always like to say people of African descent are a spiritual people. As human beings, we're all spiritual, but I don't look at it in some kind of mystical sense or a metaphysical sense. I think that spirituality just has a lot to do with your emotional connection to those who are in your life, or your emotional connection to just simply being alive as a being. It might be your emotional connection to your community. So that to me is what spirituality is to me. So that pretty much wraps up the atheist part of this episode. I support feminism, but I'm not a feminist. And the reason is, being a man born of male privilege when the circumstances present themselves, and despite that I'm a man of color, I will never experience what women go through on the daily. I can only understand it listening and learning through women's experiences and through the history of women's struggles. So on that level, that's where I am a supporter. I've also been suspicious about people who jump headlong into other people's struggles and adopt it as their own. I find that a little problematic when men do it in feminist spaces. And so, for me anyway, speaking for only myself, I could never really go there. Because you could only be an ally to a group or a struggle, but unless you have truly lived the way that they live on a day-to-day basis, you can't really claim their identity. Could a white man become a black nationalist and assume leadership to further the cause? I think we would all agree that this is absurd. And yet, We have seen over the years how easy it is for men to claim themselves to be feminist, and in some instances assume leadership and have careers based on that adoption of the feminist identity. Now, a perfect example to me is Professor Hugo Schweitzer. This guy's a professor where a feminist could have been a professor, and he went on to create a little brand for himself as such that has made him money, whereas it is a struggle for a woman feminist to do the same, or there are at least very few of them who have done the same, or who are able to achieve that. Plus, we learned that he had a really shady past with women in his relationships. Based on experiences from other women, they too have suffered pretty badly at the hands of so-called male feminists. I'll put it to you this way. If I see a person who has abused drugs all their life, and then they come to stop taking them, they go cold turkey, then in a week or a year they say that they're clean and sober, but they never really learned as to why they use drugs in the first place or what triggers them to use them. So if you could imagine a man who's been raised in male privilege and socialized to see women in a few social roles, either as broodmare, girlfriend, wife, or porn queen. Some male feminists have the tendency to treat the women of their political and personal lives in accordance to how they've been socialized to see women. It has a tendency to resurface. So it's not surprising that they might do things like objectify women in their personal lives, but then they want to keep up this political facade. They might wind up giving shit work to their female comrades while they get to do all the nice, juicy, more prolific roles in political organizing. So, for me, I always give the side eye to somebody who suddenly thinks that they could just claim themselves to be a feminist. And going back to Schweitzer, his privilege has a lot to do with his careerism in that field. Of course, I'm open to debate on this issue, and I don't take this position to shame or attack other men who claim themselves as feminists, and I'm only speaking for myself. Again, I just feel like I want to explain my position on this. So again, I support feminism, but I don't consider myself a feminist, and that's the reason why. So why do I support feminism? I want to dismantle capitalism, and I want to dismantle racism, and I want to dismantle classism. As a human being who has a simple desire to uproot and destroy all systems that oppress others as they oppress me and mine. So, from my perspective, I see no point of systems like that, as they hinder the evolution of human society. So, those systems gotta go. That's why I support feminism. It is a liberation movement that I believe has the potential to help overthrow the aforementioned oppressive systems, along with other liberation movements. Do I see feminism as a white thing? If we saw everything as a white thing or a black thing, we'd be in a sorry fucking state. It's like saying if we never embraced open source technology, we'd just be stuck with Mac OS and Windows. We should then be happy about that. Fuck that. The thing a lot of us progressives have forgotten is that we have ideas that can be modified and they can be mixed and they can match in order to make things better. We never move forward in that case. Also, a lot of the misogynists love that line about Becky the plantation daughter because they really don't want you to see that there have always been black feminists who have always been doing their own independent work for years, mainly since the damn 70s. Many of them have been unapologetic on this score because of the classist and arrogant and racist politics of some white feminists in the past. You have a problem with white feminists? Fine. Turn to the black ones. Or if you're a Latino or a Latina, there are plenty of Latina feminists out there who have written theories and doing political work for you to reach out and embrace. You see, the brothers in my diaspora again are trying to make black women look stupid, as if they can't have their own minds, and they never did have their own minds, and so therefore if they're rebelling against being controlled by black men, then it's all about them being controlled by white women, and that has been historically inaccurate. So a lot of the black patriarchs like to frame this narrative that the only real freedom is through black men because black women are so stupid. And the last point I want to make is in terms of why I support feminism. Those who are against it, the way I see it, from my point of view, are a bunch of people who are part of an agenda, whether they know it or not. Each and every group, the words created a liberation movement for themselves, have obviously done so because they were in positions of subjugation. They were in positions of oppression. And when they gain these rights, when they've made these sort of social gains to free themselves, it does not guarantee that they cannot be brought back to subjugation. Understand that the way it works, it has to happen through culture, and it has to happen through the reversal of laws. And you can only do this by constantly attacking and constantly chipping away at the gains that those movements have created. We see it a lot when it comes to abortion rights. It's always under attack, and there's always some tiny little chip away or some modification to the law where they raise the age of women being able to do it. They've made sure that they make it as unaffordable as possible. They make sure that it's a huge amount of paperwork and that needs to be done before a woman can even get it. I mean, does that look like something that tells you that women are free? Once they gain their freedom, they were going to be left alone? When you constantly attack a movement that set about to challenge what their social role should be, isn't it funny why there's such a huge pushback on those gains? And so therefore, we see you as the oppressor. That's their big line, by the way, the reactionaries, is that somehow the feminists are the ones who are creating some state of oppression. And meanwhile, there's not one feminist president, there's never been one feminist Congress person or Senate, member. I mean, it's ridiculous. But they have to keep bad-jacketing the feminist movement in order to later justify women's oppression. So that's the reason why I support it, because I see the agenda being at play here, and it's no accident. Well, okay, I think that's it. Of course, if you have more questions or you want me to expand or expound on anything else, I will either make another video or just simply respond in the comment section. All right.